People say that a Christian could never vote for Donald Trump. Most of the people saying that, though, they don't know who God is. But could they be right anyway? Welcome to The Conquering Truth. I'm Dan Horn.
I'm Jonathan Sides.
I'm Charles Churchill.
And I'm Joshua Horn.
You know, some polls are showing that Donald Trump gets like 80% support among evangelicals for the Republican nomination. This is a man that doesn't have any Christian testimony. He's a man that has been married 3 times. The first time he was married, that marriage ended because of his adultery. There's no question about that. He's a man that is very proud, very arrogant, very wants people to look at him and acknowledge him. And yet he's widely supported by evangelicals. So how did Donald Trump get into the position where so many evangelicals are supporting him?
I mean, this is something where, when we were talking about doing this episode, we were saying that it's very likely that a lot of the people, that listen to the podcast support Trump, which is something that I think we find concerning. And so part of it is to address that, but it's also to address, the broader question of how can someone like Trump fool the evangelicals or win them over, to get them to support someone who, if 9 times out of 10 they would reject that person, but then in this case they're going all in for him. Even now we're in the primary season. There's other candidates available, and yet still Trump has very overwhelming support.
And you look at all the demographics and evangelicals, he kind of has the most support among evangelicals versus any other demographic. So it's not even like his support's the same among white males as it is. No, evangelicals beat it all.
One of the things that's really important to emphasize, and I think we talk about this in a lot of different episodes, is how powerful things like idolatry are, how powerful ideas are, how easily you can be fooled and deceived by things. And I think it's really easy to get in a position, because as we've talked about this episode, as we've talked about Donald Trump in many different episodes over the years, I find myself at times being lured in to wanting to defend him in certain situations. There are situations where he's being attacked wrongly, but it's incredible how much influence things can have on you, how much you can get pulled in, and it's really worth it to step back and say, how should I think about this? You should not consider yourself to be someone who can't be pulled in a direction, who can't be sucked in by things, who can't be caused to follow after things that you shouldn't. And I think it's just really easy to think of yourself as always being incredibly rational, and I made these decisions and I've been very careful, when in reality you're just as susceptible as anyone else.
And this is something too where it's not just that evangelicals are making a mistake in supporting Trump and then they go back and in 4 years, whatever, they pick a new candidate. It's something where the support for Trump is actually like destroying what good political framework there was, and is actually a corrosive influence. It's not just a bad decision, but accepting him is going to lead to further problems.
And like Charles was saying, it's idolatry in a lot of ways, because it's not like Donald Trump is building something very specific. The reality is he's building something around Donald Trump, because his policies change all the time. His positions change all the time. He'll go from one speech to another and won't say the same thing. He throws out ideas all the time. It's not like he's going, I've got this political agenda that I'm trying to move the party in a specific direction. The direction he's trying to move the party is idolatry of Donald Trump.
But it's something too where, when you look at all the millions of hours that people spend talking about Trump, to walk the right line is very hard, because there are good things that he says, there are good things that he's done, and you look at a lot of the people who were, the never Trump, and a lot of them have gone really off the deep end.
Right.
They basically, most of the never Trump Republicans either are now pro-Trump Republicans or they became Democrats. There's very little middle ground.
They're kind of moderate Democrats is where most of them ended up.
Yeah. So, I think...
And moderate Democrats used to be called wacko liberals. We've just changed our terminology over the last 10 years.
Right. But, hopefully everyone will see that we're not going to the Democrat, but there is a line to walk where there are serious problems with him. And at the same time, when he was the president, he deserved honor as president. There were some good things he did as president. So it's a tricky balance to walk and not, get Trump mania or anti-Trump mania.
And I think it's really important to recognize it, because I do think this is one of the ways that he wins over evangelicals, is that some of his policies had really good economic effects. And they should have had good economic effects, especially the first 3 years. The fourth year, I think we should talk about that too, because he kind of like undid it all with blatant incompetence.
With the coronavirus.
With his coronavirus. But before that, I mean, just the policy of, there's a purpose for government, and the government isn't to try to dictate every single little thing and go out there and do everything. So if you're going to write a new regulation, you need to delete 2 regulations. That probably had more impact on the economy than anything else he did. And that's not a bad thing. That was a good policy, a wise policy. And so we shouldn't, like you said, when we're looking at Trump, we shouldn't go, oh, Trump was just terrible or Trump was great. We should instead go, why are we so interested as evangelicals in supporting him, and how much of it is because he helped our pocketbook?
Right. And the question of, is he qualified or is he not qualified too? If you're at the point where you're in the voting booth, that's a decision you have to make. And there's all kinds of people that have all kinds of good policies, but they did not deserve to be in the position that they were holding.
I mean, and things we're not going to try to do in this episode. We're not, we have an episode where we talk specifically about who should you cast a vote for and what are the principles in Scripture that direct you to cast your vote for. We have an episode where we did one on why are these 2 candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, why are these the best candidates, where we look at kind of America in general. In this one, like you said, what we really want to look at is what is it about Donald Trump that has caused people to say, we have to have him as our president. We have to follow after him. We have to support him no matter what. He is the one we have to have. What are those things? And can we look at them from a perspective, from a scriptural perspective, and understand them and hopefully understand why we've been led in this direction?
Specifically, what are the things that are Christians saying about Donald Trump? And then what does the Bible say for or against those particular positions, points, attitudes?
And so I do think that, in 1 Peter 2:13 and 14, it says, therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. God has the idea of the civil magistrate being very limited. And Donald Trump is way beyond what God says, but he's way less than what the Democrats are saying in terms of how expansive the government should be. And they're also looking and saying, I think a lot of evangelicals are looking and saying, well, you have all these quote unquote evangelical senators and congressmen, and they don't hold to that nearly as well as Donald Trump does. They're expanding government faster than you can do it. I mean, that was the whole thing about the speaker's race that went on, is that it's all about everybody's just pretending like they want to cut spending and get government down to a reasonable size. But that's not what most Republicans want, and that's not what any of the Democrats want. And so this idea that Donald Trump comes in there and actually does something that is a good thing to do, I think there's a lot of evangelicals that are saying, well, he's got all these other reasons. Biblically, he's unqualified, but they don't care that much about that. But they go, he's actually standing up and trying to constrain government. His whole talk about the swamp, which if you take a step back, he was incredibly unsuccessful at doing anything against the swamp. He talked about it. He spun a lot of rhetoric, but you can not get impeached twice. You can't have the FBI coming. You can't be indicted 4 times. You can't have all these things happen unless you really fail to do anything about the swamp. So people are going, yeah, he was going to do something about the swamp. Well, he was a failure. And I think a lot of evangelicals are looking and saying that the government is huge and we need to do something about it. Well, they're saying Donald Trump's their man because he's going to do something about it, but that's a very naive view.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues is rhetoric versus actually doing things, because he hits on certain points and he says certain things, and then you even have the media saying he's doing it. Either they're conservative media, they're glorifying him, or Democrat media, like he's slashing the government. This is the end of America as we know it. But in a lot of the things he was doing, fighting, tearing down, the deep state or whatever that might be. He didn't actually do a whole lot at a very deep level, but he talks about it a lot, and arguably he tried to, but the media is telling you that he's doing it, but it doesn't mean that he actually did it. And it's hard to, and a lot of stuff it's even hard to know unless you are really looking into it, like what was actually done. Because, you see this policy change, but then what are the other 100 policies that are out there that we just aren't familiar with unless we're really engaged in it?
And part of it is people pretend like they don't know how to solve it. It's not that hard to solve. And Donald Trump didn't bother to do it until he kind of did it when he was leaving office, which is what you do is you redesignate a whole bunch of people that are civil service and you redesignate them as political appointees, because basically you come in and change 0.5% of people in the State Department. It's not going to change any State Department policy at all. You change 0.25% of the people at Department of Justice. It doesn't change the Department of Justice at all. But these people that are making political decisions, they need to be political appointees. So Donald Trump didn't bother to do that until he was about to leave office. That's actually the solution. Everybody knows that's the solution since Teddy Roosevelt. It's not like a secret how this happened, is we decided to create civil service so that you have we're run by a bureaucracy rather than a republic. And what you have to do is you have to roll that back. And so he was pretending to do things about it, but he didn't bother to do them when he was in there for 4 years.
Even when you were talking about him wanting to reduce government spending, I actually don't think he was very good at reducing government spending. I mean, he reduced a lot of government regulation, but if you look, Donald Trump wasn't against government spending. In fact, most years that he was in office, spending wasn't really down. And
no year was
up. And the fourth year in particular, and you can, like I said, we'll get to that to talk about in particular, but in every year, he was not against spending. The one thing that he was very much against was specific government regulation. Like you talked about coming in with an attitude, the only thing that you could really clarify that he had a philosophy on and that he actually did
pushed hard
with any discipline and with any success was reducing government regulation.
Well, with the exception of foreign policy. It's really hard to say he didn't have foreign policy successes. He had great foreign policy successes.
I agree with that as well.
Right, but when when he's running for office, he's promising a balanced budget, and he just doesn't try to do that.
Right.
And COVID, it just balloons massively. But this is not a COVID problem. He was not trying to do that at all, and that's something that if you intend to do, would be incredibly difficult with the amount of spending you have to cut. That'd be incredibly difficult, and he just had no intention on actually fulfilling that promise.
But we're so used to our politicians lying to us, nobody holds that against him. Right, and that's what I say nobody in a not a pure sense, but very few people hold that against him, and that should be really concerning for the church, because Christ is the truth, and you're going and there's people even in the evangelical community that are going like Donald Trump's a Christian, but he lies constantly without any hesitation. He's not a Christian. The sign of being a Christian is you walk in the truth. And he doesn't walk in the truth, but Christians will turn around at a man that clearly has no interest in the truth unless he can use it to manipulate. And yet they go, oh, yeah, he's so truthful and so honest. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. Like you said about the balanced budget, he never even considered doing it. He throws policies out there all the time where it's just fodder for people that they hear what they want to hear and they vote for him and they don't care.
At best, on that point alone, and you could probably say this for anything we say down the road, but on that point alone, at best, what a Christian could do would be hold their nose a little bit and say, well, I'm going to vote for him because he lies less than the alternative. Make some kind of a pragmatic argument, and I'm not advocating for that. And 7 years ago, there was some of that, I'll hold my nose and vote for him. But that's not the sort of attitude that we see now. His popularity among evangelicals is increasing.
Right.
And we're in the primary. Right now, anyone could be the Republican nominee, and he has massive support. It's not a lesser of two evils. We only have two options on the ballot. Right now, if the evangelicals went behind anyone, they would be a major player in the Republican primary.
And as we talk about all these things, right, I do think it's really important to tie these back, that Christians aren't thinking like Christians. When Jesus Christ came, right, the scribes and the Pharisees, they were all worried about monetary things. That was how you worship God, was with monetary things. And Jesus Christ says to them in Matthew 23:23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. So the church is willing to, the evangelical, broad, visible church is willing to get behind Donald Trump because of money, because he improved the economy, because he helped all these things. They don't care about justice. He wasn't very good on justice. They don't, certainly not mercy and faith. And so the church, in evaluating him, is neglecting the weightier matters of the law. And that's a serious charge, right? When we think about it, is that the person who comes in and says, I'm going to do justly, and I'm going to change the system so that it starts to work in a more just manner. That's important, more important than whether he increases, the rate of growth of the economy is 1% or 3%. But yet we're far more interested in whether the growth of the economy is 3% or 1%. And we should just recognize that God's response to that is you're all hypocrites, and that's a serious charge.
I mean, we just did an episode on Israel and Gaza, and one of the points we were really trying to make in that episode was the Palestinians chose certain things. They chose the policies of we're going to let soldiers be among our civilians. We're going to go all in. We want to destroy Israel. And the truth is when their children died, they chose that. And I think one of the points you're making, is we just forget that when we choose, I want money, and I don't care who I have to get behind to do it, God's going to judge us, and we're choosing that judgment. That is what we're choosing. And we shouldn't fool ourselves. We shouldn't lie to ourselves when our children one day lay dead because we have chosen evil. We chose that. And I think that's I think that's something that it really
sowing and reaping. We really have to hold to that as a biblical concept.
And I think we just really, in the end, we are not thinking about what we're choosing with him. We're just like a child who all they see is the candy that they get. All they see is the pleasure of the sin for the season. All they see is the good thing they get out of it. And they're totally ignoring the evil that comes with it. And I think I could see myself in the last election. I did not vote for Donald Trump when he ran, but I was glad he won. And the reason I was glad he won was because it would help my pocketbook.
You mean in 2 elections ago?
Or are you
saying in 2020 he won? He won in 2020. That's Charles. Charles just came out.
Election day, he was stolen. Sidney Powell unleashed the Kraken. But when he
just unleashed their checkbook, that's another story.
Right. But when he won the first election, I didn't vote for him, but I was glad he won because I was sure it was going to help my pocketbook, and there was a part of it where I should have. It was a mixture of things I could see, but there was a part of it where I kept coming back. I could feel myself going, "Thank goodness that he got in there because I'm going to reap these benefits from it." But I knew I was ignoring the damage that it was going to cause.
And we look at it in Donald Trump, right? We're concerned about money, but Donald Trump increased dramatically the level of vulgarity that was acceptable in our culture, the public vulgarity. He just skyrocketed it. So how do you weigh those things? But I think the evangelical church is not counting any of that. It doesn't say, well, now everybody swears on television, directly related to Donald Trump. There's no question that's directly related to Donald Trump, that he, by the words that he was using, he made that the new societal norm, which is how the laws are based. So that was pure Donald Trump, but the church doesn't go, this is a really crude man that just made our culture vulgar. They just go, but he helped our pocketbook.
And the thing is, the church became a lot more vulgar. What we did, there was the Let's Go Brandon, and people know, and they're laughing openly at the fact that they know what joke they're making, they know what they're saying, they know what, and things that they would have been ashamed of doing 10 years ago.
And they're teaching their children that that's acceptable behavior, which means in 10 years, 20 years, their children will be doing things that are 10 times worse. That's
right. They won't be using the euphemism. They'll be saying the actual words.
Right. Or worse.
Right.
I think one of the other big reasons that people that people went for Trump is abortion. And I think that's one where people probably look back, the people who were single issue abortion voters, they're going to say that was a great choice because now he appointed judges that overturned Roe versus Wade. So does that mean that he deserves we should reelect him so that because he stopped abortion?
Well, I think that the simple answer there is his stated position is that we should have the same laws as the European nations have, which is about abortion open access to abortion until 15 weeks. He calls himself pro-life, but he's no more pro-life than the liberal countries in Europe. He's very, very much not pro-life. So even if you say, hey, it worked the last time, to say it will work this time, his position this time is in a lot of states, like Florida, for instance, they should start murdering more babies. That is his stated position. So we have to be really careful. Why would you vote for him, even if you liked what he did in the first time? And I'm not saying that he actually did it, which is, you look at Ronald Reagan lied. You look at George Bush lied.
You look at who he was going to appoint, his liberal Democrat sister.
Right.
But, he had staffers who were able to convince him, you got to pick from this list, and he did it, which is,
Well, it's more the Federalist Society, I think, than just directly staffers.
Well, sure, but I'm lumping that in there.
Right. But so yeah, one of the things is he's pretty easily manipulated. So, but I'm not sure that you can turn around and go, we should be giving him a lot of points for 2024, because his position for 2024 is very much against the pro-life position. But yet evangelicals are saying, yes, we need to vote for him because he's pro-life. No, he's not.
It's one thing to look at what happened and say, this was good.
Right.
And to thank God for that, and then say, but that doesn't mean that this is a qualification that requires me to vote for him in the future or to trust him in the future, because I don't think he's a principled man. I don't think that he's going to be making principled decisions on these things consistently down the line, and therefore I'm not going to base, past performance is no guarantee of future returns with Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, you have Cyrus sends the Jews back. Does that mean you now vote for the pagan Cyrus?
And he paid for the temple to be built. Yeah. And then he just bowed down before another 100 gods. Other than that, he was a great guy. But based on where most evangelicals are, I don't see how they wouldn't vote for Cyrus. I mean,
yeah, but we're not even saying vote for Cyrus when you have two options. We're saying pick Cyrus out of anyone.
Another thing that Donald Trump did that I would say, from my perspective, that I think was good that he did, was he actually constrained immigration in some ways that if you look at our episode we did on immigration, where we're pretty much more pro opening the border in certain ways, but if you want to open the border, you're going to have to change policies in the United States. And Donald Trump kind of basically said, you can't play games with these things. If you're going to do it, if you're going to have the policy the way you have it, he kind of pushed to the logical conclusion and said you have to follow the procedures we have in place. And he forced that to be done. And there was an ugliness to the border that was, there was a part of it where it's like you have to deal with these things. And he caused certain types of immigration to go down where it was good that it went down. And he, there were real things that he did about immigration that were actually very beneficial.
And he was willing to push Mexico really hard to do that, because basically he got to stay in Mexico, which was the whole thing, right? Everybody comes over as claims asylum, even though they don't have any 90% of the time they have no legitimate asylum claim. They're let loose. I think now they're giving them court dates in like 2034 or something like that. I mean, it's like 11 years behind, and then they don't show up for those court dates. And Trump said, well, the solution to that is just force them to stay in Mexico. And he said, we're going to shut down transfer of money to Mexico unless you do this. So all of a sudden, Mexico is really quick. And so it's one of those things that nobody else had the guts to do it.
Right.
Because it's not that hard of a solution.
And just like he promised, he built a wall on the whole border and got Mexico to pay for it.
He got Joe Biden to fund money for it.
But that's not what he said.
I know.
If he had said that would have been impressive. But he didn't say that.
And, the other thing that I think, another reason why evangelicals support Donald Trump is his foreign policy, and specifically the Abraham Accords, that in a lot of ways he moved the capital to Jerusalem.
The embassy to Jerusalem.
Excuse me. He moved the embassy. He acknowledged the Israeli capital was actually in Jerusalem, so he moved the embassy there, and which is something that I think even back to Reagan that they were talking about, but never would do it and then Trump does it. And then you also have the Abraham Accords where he's creating these agreements between Israel and a lot of other Arab states. I mean, like I said before, if you look at his success, I think he had enormous success in foreign policy. And especially when you're evangelicals, that you think Israel is the chosen people of God rather than the chosen people of God being the sons of Abraham by faith, which is what it says in Romans. other than that, if you're looking at, if your doctrine's wrong about who Israel is, then all of a sudden you say he will bless those who bless Israel. So therefore, obviously we should vote for Donald Trump because we're going to be blessed by God because he blessed Israel, because he really was a blessing to Israel. And forgetting that nation that's called Israel, he did bring much more peace, and you see how badly it decayed once he left office. But he really did bring peace and stability to that region in ways that hadn't been there for a while.
And if I recall, he didn't get us involved in any foreign wars.
Right.
Which is, I don't remember the last president we can say that about.
And I think it's really, we should, from a pro-evangelical perspective, we haven't been involved in any foreign wars since World War II. The rest of them are just the government going and committing murder, because that's what constitutionally it is if you don't declare war. It's you're going and committing murder. And so he murdered less people than other presidents.
No, his attitude towards like drone strikes and things like that.
That's why I said murdered less people.
Right.
Because
it wasn't any new foreign combat.
Right. No, I agree.
And he didn't escalate.
What was going
he
on.
didn't. Most of them he didn't. I mean, he escalated against Syria for a little bit, but then it actually came down. And most of the other ones he did de-escalate. I mean, you have to. He murdered fewer people than Bush did. Than Clinton. Than Obama. I mean,
but his position on murder.
But still, he had the right to.
Right. He still believed he had the right to commit murder. And that's, I mean.
And for evangelicals that are even saying, we should be careful about these things, that is inherently unjust. And when God says, when Christ said, remember the weightier matters of the law, to go and murder people with your army without declaring war is unjust. Forget any doctrine of unjust warfare, because the doctrine of unjust warfare says it has to be legal, and it's illegal what we do all the time. And yet we turn around and go, it's, this is war. No, it's not war. It's murder.
And I think that's part of what you're saying is like with immigration, the way to affect immigration was to force people to follow certain rules. It was to push on those things. But in an area where he didn't want to, he just didn't.
Right.
And so, I mean, this is part of the issue. And I understand, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of people who go, but there's nobody out there who's principled. But the issue is
why do you have nobody principled?
Right.
Well, if in the primary you're not willing to vote for principled people, don't complain that there's nobody principled. That's who you wanted.
Right. Because
it's like Hamas, which is the example you used before. They say, "Oh, we didn't vote for terrorists." Yes, you did. And we vote for unprincipled people when you have another choice, and nobody wants to make that choice. They all want to vote for unprincipled people, and then they go, "Oh, yeah, we're evangelicals. We didn't have any choice. Lesser of two evils." Blah blah blah. It's just not true.
I mean, this is one of the things that I think Christians are just incredibly hypocritical about, and I find myself being hypocritical about it. But there's a part of it where when they go, you're throwing your vote away, you're doing these things, but we teach our children, you do the right thing no matter what the cost. You do it, and God produces the increase. I mean, when I was growing up, I would see people, my parents would tell me stories about, here's a person, they're put in a position, everybody else is doing evil, everybody else is doing it. What should the person do? What should they do? They should do what's right. They should do what's right, and God will bless, and God will give result. This is faith. This is Gideon. This is every story that we have ever seen in Scripture where God turns things around. It is because a very small number of people say, I will do what's right. And then we turn around and we go, but there's no way we're going to get back in authority if we don't vote for somebody out there. So we're just throwing our vote away if we vote on principle. And it's just the most bizarre thing. And it drives me crazy because I understand the lure. But that's literally the lure. I mean, that's it.
The lure is walk by sight rather than faith.
Right.
That's the lure.
We've already identified it as sin. We've already said we know it's sin, and then we go, well, but I got to do it anyway. And so, I mean, this is just, it kills me, and I don't know any other way to say it. The sense of what I'm saying kind of ties into one of the next points we want to go to, which is that Donald Trump ties into the Christian sense of perceived persecution. There is a part of it where we know that there will be enmity between Christians and the world. And Donald Trump, like you said in the beginning, he's a proud man. He's brash. He fights.
He's as worldly as you get.
Right. And so, but when he's willing to wade into fights, when he's willing to wade into battles, when he does this, when he's attacked, we have this sense of going, we can identify with him because we feel like we're persecuted. He's persecuted, and there's just this fundamental connection. And whether it's by strategy or by being fortunate or by the nature of what he is, he falls into that position, and Christians go, I identify with this guy.
And there's a common enemy, the liberals.
Right.
There's a common enemy, the liberals, but just the definition of who liberals are, Donald Trump falls into.
In reality, there's no common enemy.
No, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm just saying is what we've done is we've twisted it so much. And I think it's actually slightly different. I think everybody knows what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be like Peter before the Sanhedrin who says, I must obey God and not man. We all know that we're supposed to be bold and that this is a commandment that we're to be bold. But yet most Christians are not bold at all. And so then they see Donald Trump acting boldly and they go kind of like, well, that's who we're supposed to be like. So even though he's doing it in the wrong way, he's doing it in the wrong times, I think there's a certain sense that they're going, that's what a Christian's supposed to be like. And I'm really not like that. So he must be a super Christian. Even though it's just this boldness, right? Because, I mean, the Bible is filled with, stories of bold men. Right. Daniel, Gideon, Jesus, Peter, Paul. So we keep going on. We can just keep naming names. And so there's this call to boldness that I think that the evangelicals are in general failing to do broadly. And so they see Donald Trump being bold and they kind of go like, he must be one of us. He's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and there's a part of it where, we can look at Trump and see how he's lied about and say, well, they're lying about him. It might be persecution. Like, because they take anything. Like the most recent one was, he called Hezbollah very smart. So he supports terrorists. Well, calling your enemy smart, calling your enemy smart is, it's not saying you support them, but there's a million examples of that where they lie about what he says, and he says all kinds of outrageous things, but then we're distracted by the fact that they call him out on a bunch of stuff that in fact is not objectionable, and then we're distracted by that, and we end up sympathizing with him when he doesn't deserve it.
And we should read Matthew 5 because it's important to recognize when God says you're blessed when they do that. You're not blessed just if they do that. It's not some universal blessing. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. That's not why Donald Trump is being attacked. He's being attacked because he's proud. He's being attacked because of his position. He's not being attacked because he's walking in righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I think there's a lot of evangelicals that they go, oh, he's being persecuted. They're lying about him. They're saying all these false things. So somehow this is a blessing from God. No, it's only a blessing from God if it is for the name of Christ, and he's not being attacked for the name of Christ ever that I've ever seen, because he doesn't hold up the name of Christ in any way. But yet people see him being attacked and they go, well, this is like Christian persecution. No, that's not Christian persecution. That's Christian judgment. Christian persecution is where you are exalting the name of Christ, and because of that, people attack you. But we kind of forget all that and just go, that's what it looks like to be persecuted. No, that's not what it looks like at all.
I think it's really worth, I want to slightly correct something you said a minute ago. You said they attack him over silly things, and we think he deserves kind of like our sympathy, but he doesn't. The answer is he does deserve our sympathy. He doesn't deserve to be followed.
Right.
And I think that's it, is we're in this point where we're conflating sympathy for someone who's out there getting attacked and going, therefore, he should be our leader. And we're not even questioning the fact that he went out in front of us and said, I should be your leader. I mean, it's a really big thing for someone to walk out and go, you should follow me. I'm going to take you somewhere good. I'm going to take you somewhere right. I know what's right. And this is why you've got to get back to the money thing, is because the only qualification Donald Trump ever had to even say I could take you back somewhere right is related to money. That's it. There's no morals. He had no moral qualifications whatsoever. So this is really where, as a Christian, you should, because I see myself do it. I see myself, and I do have sympathy for him. And then I want to go, boy, maybe we should make him the nominee again. And it's crazy how it works.
And I think evangelicals don't understand what persecution is. So they just look at him and go, you look at Charlottesville, right? That's a good example. He said, I don't mean the neo-Nazis, or I forget what term he used, but I don't mean the neo-Nazis when I say there's good people on both sides. And they edit it out, right? I mean, they completely and totally lied about it the whole time.
Right.
And so they go, well, that's like Paul being persecuted. No, it's not, because it was all just about his ego, and it had nothing to do with Christ. But yet at the same time, I do think you're making a very good point, which is, yeah, what the media did to him was horrific. And we should really go, why are we listening to any of this media? They should be forced off the air. Why is anybody listening to this garbage? Because they so openly lie. I mean, they'll stand there and I remember even in Fox News, the guy who moderated one of the debate that said, Donald Trump interrupted first. Well, no, actually he and Biden had interrupted 7 times before Donald Trump interrupted anybody. It was just a bold-faced, blatant lie, no question of truth. So why is anybody listening to these people?
Right.
That's what you should take away from it, not that you should follow somebody who they're doing that to.
Right.
Just because they're doing that to somebody, that doesn't mean that person's righteous or that he's good or he's a good leader, any of that. It doesn't mean any of that. But yet they look at it and they go, well, this is happening. This is what Christian persecution looks like.
I mean, I think another big area where people sympathize with him and then say, therefore, I need to vote for him, is saying that the 2020 election was stolen, which I think is an area where he has done tremendous damage to the country by, instead of pointing at real, injustices in the law and things were changed because of COVID and things like that. And instead, before the election's even held, he says they're going to steal it. And then he says they steal it by promoting all kinds of false, made up stories, or stories that when you do a little research into them, they fall apart. But even assume that the 2020 election is stolen. People think that, well, because the election was stolen from him, therefore he needs another chance. Like, it's not how it works. You don't get a free chance because they stole it from you once. I mean, still, you have a responsibility to choose someone who's qualified and who's the best person to do the job, not someone who something bad happened to him.
And people act like these things matter. I know that, like, Glenn Beck, I think it was Glenn Beck. No, it was Tucker Carlson, did this big thing about how Obama and that Sheriff Joe out in Arizona has now proven that Obama is not a U.S. citizen. Exactly what does that mean now? It means nothing. Like nothing. Who cares? He was already president.
Right.
But yet somehow this is supposed to overturn everything, and this is no, who cares? It's completely irrelevant. And maybe he could get him on fraud charges or something, although he's not a sheriff anymore. But but yet people look and they go, well, if what happened in 2020 or what happened in 2008, we can somehow go and fix that. No, it's done. You don't get to go back in time and change things.
What you can fix is you can fix your policies. You can, which people really aren't. They're not wanting to focus on and actually think about.
I actually think in a lot of Republican-led states, they did a pretty good job of tightening up their election security. A number of them.
Right. What I'm saying is,
but Donald Trump wasn't pushing them.
Right. The people who are upset about it aren't frequently thinking about it in that methodical way.
And
the
Donald
people who want to get elected are.
Donald Trump is not trying to solve the problem.
Right.
He's trying to raise an issue and trying to get an emotional following. He's trying to get, you should be sympathetic towards me, instead of going, well, here's where things were broken. Here's where this state should change it. And then go to that state and campaign for it and push it.
Right.
If he was actually a politician that wanted to lead and wanted to have any claim at anybody to follow him, those are the things he should have been doing instead of just whining.
Yeah, because, for him, it's not about election security. For him, he is very proud and he has to win on everything, which means if he doesn't win, he either redefines victory and claims victory when he hasn't won, or he has to say, they stole it from me illegally and unjustly. Those are, he's not willing to admit defeat, so those are his two options. I don't think there was any, I don't think it mattered what happened in 2020. He was going to say the election was stolen. And if he becomes the nominee, whether or not he becomes the nominee, we're going to hear the 2024 was stolen from him. That's how it works.
So, you just mentioned that his reaction is really related to his pride. We've talked about this many times. It's worth reading a Bible verse about pride. Just 1 Peter 5, verse 5. Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And there's a sense in which a lot of what we're talking about is step back from things for a moment and recognize that there is a story going on here. Anywhere you go and you read your Bible and you read about what's happening to kings, it's saying, look at what God's doing to this person. Read 1st and 2nd Samuel, read 1st and 2nd Kings, read the book of Daniel, read your New Testament, read what Peter's been saying about, the reason that you submit to these people is God put them in place. And so if you think about that, if you can think about your political leaders as God put these people in place because he's telling a story, and recognize the story he's telling with Donald Trump is, I resist the proud. And no matter what bits and pieces of him you might like, you have to say he's a very proud man, and he's suffering in large part because he's proud. That's really obvious, that what's happening to Donald Trump in many of these things is he's a proud man, and God doesn't tolerate pride like that.
And I think that's really important to recognize just how many of the problems in his administration were caused by his pride. For instance, he was impeached twice. Both of them were because of pride. Now, granted, the first one, it looks in hindsight that Biden was also trying to cover up, right? Cover up his own crimes with Burisma and stuff. That seems likely that the Democrats were trying to cover up Biden. But even so, his words, the way he responded, the way he acted, all of it was antagonistic to push them to the point where they impeach. And certainly in the second impeachment, he was impeached because he was proud. That's what it comes down to. He was impeached because he was proud. And God's resisting it. And then Christians turn around and go, it was unfair for him to be impeached. Well, no, it wasn't just for him to be impeached.
We've done episodes talking specifically about the injustice. But you can't come back and then go, he had no sin in the matter. Right.
It was fair that he was impeached because God was the one that was resisting the proud, even though it was unjust the way they did it. And those two can both be true. God was not being unkind to Donald Trump to impeach him twice. He deserved it. He's a proud man that came in with a huge amount of arrogance. The way he treated the FBI, I mean, he should have done things to clean it up if he was going to deal with it. But instead, he insults them on one hand and insults all the people that are in Washington on one hand. And then he turns around and goes, I can't get anything done that I want to get done. Well, maybe if you start out by not insulting all of them, or you actually did something about it to do it, instead you think you can insult them and get away with it and not have any effect. That's not what it looks like. That's not the effect of pride.
I mean, and I think that's a really key thing, because there is a part of it where we've talked about the fact that there are Christians who are bold. The people who are saying you shouldn't be proud, the picture they paint is of what they want is they want someone who's milquetoast. You know what I mean? They argue. Right. And so there's this, you have this dichotomy. God is saying Christians can be bold, but they are never supposed to be proud. And the problem is
I have a duty to be bold. I want to be more blunt in your words.
Pride. We enjoy watching the results of his pride. This is why Jesus infuriated people. This is why Moses infuriated people. They were meek. They were bold. They didn't just challenge sin in a certain area. They got things done. They pushed things, but they infuriated people. You would not have liked, you wouldn't have been comfortable around Jesus if you were a sinner. In the sense of if you were married to your sin, if you loved your sin. And we like Donald Trump because he frustrates our enemies, but he does it by sinning.
John the Baptist is a really good example of what you're getting at there. He was so bold that people went out into the wilderness to see him. I mean, Jesus even said, what'd you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing. You went out there because he was putting on a show, because he was calling names that and he was bringing receipts. And then Jesus shows up and he says, I'm not worthy to untie your sandals. And then his disciples start following Jesus, and people say, well, were you going to do anything about this? He's like, no, he must increase, I must decrease. That's the kind of person that is properly bold, and yet humble before God. And there's no contradiction between the two.
Right.
And you look at, talk about loving his pride. I mean, one of his big, rallying cries during, his election was lock her up. We're going to lock up, Hillary Clinton, which something that, did he have any intention of doing anything? It's hard to say he does. Obviously, he didn't lock her up. We don't know. I don't think he really made any effort to do that, but it's something that he's putting out there all the time. And then now he has all these indictments against him. Not that they're just what they're doing. They're either, unjust or very destructive to the country at a minimum. But you look at God's justice, according to man's justice, they're unjust. According to God's justice, he was calling for his political enemies just as a political talking point, not as a way to say this is actually a crime that is unjust and needs to be punished. And now he's reaping what he sowed.
And let's be serious. Evangelicals were chanting along. Lock her up, because they don't care about the weightier matters of the law. What are you scribes and Pharisees? Hypocrites. You don't care about the weightier matters of the law. The people that were chanting, lock her up. It's one thing to say she should be investigated and indicted if she actually committed crimes and be put in prison, 100% for that. But where you're just saying lock her up, the chant is let's skip all process and just throw her in prison. Well, that's incredibly unjust. But evangelicals were chanting it too, and we should just recognize how evil that is in the sight of God to be chanting that. And to whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, if they justly did something wrong, absolutely. But just to lock them up because they're a political enemy, now he finds out what it's like.
I want to be really clear. I'm the poster boy for following Donald Trump. I mean, I am the person who, if Donald Trump has a target in the evangelical movement, I grew up.
Well, he got 80%, so he has a really broad target.
I'm just telling you, though. I mean, I don't know how much you guys get, but I mean, like, I can identify with getting every single thing that we're talking about. These aren't like, for me at least, they're not philosophical points. Every single one of them are things I've had to actually wrestle with because I feel this pull. I mean, and it's really easy. I mean, I have to actually step back because I wanted to be pulled into going to lock her up. And like I said, and you have to actually sit there and go, I have guilt because I didn't care about justice. Now I want to go, you people don't care about justice. The people who are wanting to lock him up, you don't care about justice. And to be righteous, I have to go,
either did I.
I didn't care about justice. And I don't think they're Christians. But I want to say I am. You know what I mean? And so, and there's this part of it where you have to go, wait a minute. And if you're not willing to do that, if you're so caught up that you can't stop, something's wrong. And this is a real check moment for you. Do you go, wait a minute, I'm guilty? And so, I think it's one of those things where God gives you these moments where you can go, hold on, I don't care about justice. Actually changing your political views should be part of repentance. Because if your political views aren't about morality, who cares? And if you're a Christian and you don't think these things are moral and you don't understand what morality is, then it's just a game and everything's available. And that's the way the enemies think. That's the way people you think are your enemies, is it's just a game to them. And so if you're playing that game, you're as evil as anyone else. And who cares what you do? You're going to hell. Vote for whoever you want.
And it's a game with no rules, right? Because in the Christians, right, the rule is to win, yes. As opposed to Christians are supposed to be going, the rules are what really matters, right? God calls us to walk in righteousness, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly before your God. Well, do justly is the only one that's like actually what you're supposed to be spending your time doing is justice, and yet we turn around and chant lock her up. That's just so unchristian, and I don't think the Christian community goes, wait a second, this is really contrary to what Christ came for.
Give her a fair trial, just doesn't have
not
the
as
same
catchy.
punch.
People can lie to themselves about him showing honor to covenants because they do look at his children, and he did raise his children, and his children are following after him and dealing with him, and so that they can go, oh, this is a family man. Even though he's destroyed multiple marriages, he doesn't believe in covenants. He doesn't hold the covenants. he's just terrible in what he did to families. But evangelicals are so eager to look for any excuse to say this is a man that you can build a society off of. Well,
he believes in a covenant of loyalty
to him, not the other way around.
Right.
Not a dual covenant, but a covenant of
Mary
loyalty
Trump,
to him.
She is on the outside, right? I mean, it's not a two-way covenant.
Right. And so you just look at how and so all these Christians that say, yeah, we support family values, they don't look at Donald Trump and go, how could we support him? Instead, they go, yeah, we support family values. And we need to recognize when we buy this, it like ripples through. One of the other things that I think that people look to Donald Trump for, because of his boldness and because of his, because he's willing to go out there and antagonize people, is that, they read places about, well, I find a man that will stand in the gap. And they look at Donald Trump and they go, here's a man that will stand in the gap. Here's a man that will block the Democrats who are coming, this liberal horde that's coming to destroy us, and he'll stand in the gap there and prevent it from happening. And I think, again, there's this attitude that, God's looking and saying, Jesus Christ is the man that stood in the gap, but then we're supposed to be the people that stand in the gap. And so there's this transference of it to, again, this is what we're supposed to be doing, but Donald Trump is doing something similar, so we show honor to him because he's the one that's actually standing up there and stopping them. Instead of actually going, who's supposed to be the warriors? Who's supposed to put on the full armor of God? The evangelicals are. So why are we looking to somebody else to stand in the gap?
And there's a part of it where, one of the things we talk about a lot is when we don't understand Scripture, when we don't understand doctrine, Scripture can become like an image. Scripture can become, one of the power of images, we did an episode on it, is that an image doesn't have any meaning to it. It just has symbols to it. And all it has are those symbols. And so when you don't understand what it actually means to stand in the gap, when you don't actually understand what that is, so you see somebody who's taking bullets, who's willing to fight, and you go, that's what that is. And there's just this, that's just a real problem. When in reality, when you go to vote, you're more likely to be, if you actually vote with integrity, that's more like someone standing in that's a better picture from the scriptural viewpoint of someone standing in the gap of doing what's right when no one else is, much more than what Donald Trump is doing.
Right. Because
in the end, when to be someone who's standing in the gap, you have to actually be like Christ. You have to be someone who obeys and does what they were sent to do, who comes and fulfills what God has asked of them, and even down to the point of even to death. And so there's this part of it where the only reason he can be in that position, the only reason people can see that is because we actually don't care about what God's word really says. We don't care about the details. We just want the picture. We want, there's an old Teddy Roosevelt quote about, the guy in the ring. We see the man in the ring who's receiving the blows and the slings and the arrows. He's and he's talking about he's done more than the person who's never done anything. And so,
the man in the arena.
The man in the arena, yeah, the man in the ring, the man in the arena who's in there, and he's done more than even the guy who loses. He's done more than the person who never ventures anything and doesn't taste the bitterness of defeat. And there's this part of it where we go, yeah, that's standing in the gap, and it's like, no, that's just humanism. You're just worshiping man, and now you've called it Christianity. And that's part of the problem with the church is we don't care about the truth of God's word. We don't care about what God actually says.
And we just want people to do what we know we're supposed to do. And so we admire people that inform, not in substance, but informed, do what Christians are supposed to do. And so people look and admire him instead of going, wait a second, what am I doing?
That's what did he actually do?
Well, but I think even more importantly is the evangelicals need to start going, what am I doing?
Yes.
Because that's actually the problem. The reason that people are looking towards Donald Trump as somebody who stands in the gap is because evangelicals won't get out of their pew and do anything.
Right.
They don't stand up. They just sit back and do absolutely nothing. And then they go, oh, but look at Donald Trump. He's standing in the gap. Well, if evangelicals just decided, for instance, that they wouldn't vote for anybody who believed in murdering babies, the politics would completely change. The Republican Party, at least, would be 100% pro-life. But no, the evangelicals aren't willing to stand up and do anything. And then they look at Donald Trump and they go, oh, but look, he is. As if they can vicariously feel like they're doing what they should be doing because he's doing something, even though he's doing the wrong thing. At least he's doing something. And then they complain about all the rhinos. Well, what should it be? Ricos? No. Kinos. Christians
Trump
in
is
name
a
only.
Ryko.
Yeah.
It should be Cinos.
Well, whatever.
Sinos.
But anyway, the church is happy with Christians in name only, and then we get upset with Republicans in name only. I mean, this is ridiculous. Maybe the Christians should actually start acting like Christians and then stop complaining about the Republicans not acting like who they think Republicans should be. Well, if they start to actually act like Christians, the other problem would be solved.
Right.
But yet instead of them standing in the gap, what they go is at least Donald Trump's doing something to make themselves feel better because they're not doing anything.
And that's not nothing for at least explaining the psychological motivation to look and say, oh, politicians have done nothing look at where the Republican Party has us after all of these attempts. Look at all of the bad nominees we've had. He's different. And that appeal there's an appeal to somebody who's different.
Right. And I mean, especially like all these people kept saying, yes, I will nominate Supreme Court justices that won't overturn Roe versus Wade, and they all lied, including Reagan. Reagan knew that Sandra Day O'Connor was pro Roe versus Wade. All the evidence is that he knew way before he nominated her, but yet he nominates her anyway, knowing that it won't be overturned. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump comes and does it. So there is an aspect that Donald Trump, because of his pride, because of his character, he wants to have people kick back against him, so he'll stand and he'll do some things that other people wouldn't do because he wants the applause. But I think people then turn around and go, that means that, like for Roe versus Wade, that somehow this means that he's righteous in the eyes of God,
Or even pro-life.
Or even pro-life.
I mean,
but I do think, you look at Matthew 6:5, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the street, that they may be seen by men. Surely I say to you, they have their reward. Donald Trump wants to do those things so that he gets notoriety. That's probably the right word. So that he gets applause, so that he gets recognition, so everybody talks about him on the media, on media all the time. And he's gotten his reward from God for what he did for Roe versus Wade, because I think he did it mostly just to go, look, I'm different. And it was a good difference, but it also doesn't mean that he was righteous in any way.
And he's still getting his reward. When he's in court and people are talking about him, that's what he wanted. And he's still getting it.
Right. When we think about standing in the gap, the idea is that the government is trying to explode in size. It's trying to be in control of everything. And Donald Trump was standing there and he was resisting it. Well, that's like a complete fabrication. That just isn't what he ended up doing in reality. In reality, when COVID came along, they said, his advisors, and you read books, and his advisors are going to Jared Kushner, who he basically handed over everything, and said, most important thing is for me to get reelected. And then they didn't hesitate to try to take away all rights of citizens. They suspended meeting of churches. I mean, they had no hesitation to enhance tyranny however they could. Let's print as much money as we can. So to turn around and pretend like Donald Trump held to resisting tyranny, not at all. It's just blatantly false. It was when he thought that he would get applause for it, he did it. And when he thought he wouldn't get applause for it, he didn't do it. And there was plenty of evidence that it was a bad idea from the beginning, but he wanted to protect himself so that he could get reelected. And everybody was saying, you won't have any chance to get reelected if this ends up being as bad as it could be. And so he destroyed the economy. That he did really real things that helped it in the 3 years before that. But to act like he's standing in the gap resisting this liberal onslaught just isn't true. It's just a complete misunderstanding of what Donald Trump was and what he did.
And people don't. I mean, this is one of the issues. Is people don't actually hold him accountable for that. They don't actually look at it and go. When you look at him, you have to look at him and go, when he was put in a difficult situation, this is where he ran. This is what he did. This is how he thought. Because the other thing, I mean, like when you look at, did he nominate those pro-life judges because he said abortion should absolutely be stopped? You know he didn't. You know that. I mean, it's very clear from his position. That's not what he did it for. So you can't go, he was completely principled on those. And so when you start putting together this picture, we actually have a picture of the man Donald Trump is. We've seen it. And so you really just have to go, am I willing to go and continue to believe the rhetoric and believe the hype and keep saying these things? Or am I going to actually look at him and go, oh, wait a minute, I know what he is. If I didn't know it before, if I wasn't willing to believe it based on his life, at this point the experiment's been run. You've seen him. And are you actually willing to judge him on the merits that he should be judged on?
And, we look at where the country is. We look at the direction things are going. We look at the expansion of the censorship from the government level. I mean, that's Donald Trump. I'm not saying President Biden hasn't gone further, but that's Donald Trump. So don't complain about how Facebook was censoring things. That was Donald Trump. So don't complain about when Biden does it, because he didn't start it. It was done before. So much for that he stands in the gap, that he's resisting tyranny. How about shutting down churches? He was pushing hard for shutting down churches. He was telling states they had to shut down churches. And does the church care more about the worship of God, or do they care more about money? Because we know where Donald Trump is. He wouldn't hesitate to shut down churches in order to for his political agenda, for his, the level of evidence that he had that he was making decisions on. He didn't consider that to be a weighty matter to shut down churches and to push for states to shut down churches. And that should have been a really weighty matter. We're back to the same idea. What does the church think's more important? His attacks on the church, or the fact that he makes some money?
I mean, this isn't about tyranny in particular, but it is about something that, his views on homosexuality. Everybody acts like, there are a lot of people who act like he's against homosexuality. He's very openly pro-homosexuality. He's very openly pro-sodomy. Now, I don't know what he'll come out and say tomorrow, but it shouldn't matter.
He was the first president who, when he was elected into office, was in favor of homosexual marriage.
Right.
It was an epiphany that Obama had to come to. Obama did not have that opinion going into office. He came to it afterwards.
Well, he didn't have the stated opinion coming into office.
Fine.
I think
his
probably
his
pretty
stated
careful.
opinion was against it,
Right.
but Donald Trump is the first person that the American people picked to go into office who was in favor of homosexual marriage when he went in.
He appoints the first homosexual ambassador, I think.
And he really liked Richard Grenell, or whatever his name is. I mean, he had him as, appointed him to other positions. He considered him one of his closest friends.
Yeah, and there was I saw some conservative commentator lauding Trump, like today, saying, another African country legalized homosexuality. This is great. Trump's work is continuing, and there's a lot of truth to that.
And so one of the ways that Donald Trump manipulates the media is when the media pushes back and they say he's a homophobe, right? I mean, that's one of the things that they keep saying is he's in his position has never been that, ever. I mean, that's just not who Donald Trump is. But yet, to win the evangelical vote, when they lie about him, he just lets them lie about him, and he doesn't ever put up a defense to say, no, look at my record, because all he has to do is say, look at my record. Instead, he just lets them say it because he will hold that position, and most evangelicals don't care what he really believes. It's what the media says. And so the media says, oh, he's a homophobe, so they go, rah, 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 as opposed to going, which even homophobe's a bad term in the sense that you can be very anti-homosexual without being afraid of them. But the media doesn't believe that. And so, but you look at it, and it's just this. Donald Trump doesn't hesitate to manipulate people. And one of the ways that he can manipulate the evangelicals is just let the media talk about it as if it's something, and if it ever really matters, he can point to his record. His record was incredibly strong towards homosexuality, towards supporting homosexuality.
Right. And then really when they attack him, it basically goes back to he's being persecuted. And so because you know what I mean? It's just
right. Even though he's pro-homosexual, he gets attacked for being anti-homosexual, And then the evangelicals go, oh, look, this is why he's being attacked, when everybody knows he's pro-homosexual. It bothers to look.
Right.
It's not like the media doesn't know that. The media all knows that he's been pro-homosexual for decades. I mean, and that's one other thing that I think that another reason that the evangelicals like to follow Donald Trump is because they see the media as their enemy, that the media is very much against it. And there has been nobody in my lifetime that came even close to being able to manipulate the media as well as Donald Trump. And so there's some aspect of it that the evangelicals like him because they go, all the media is against us. And look at how much Donald Trump can manipulate the media without any problems whatsoever. He can just play them. The number of hours of free coverage he got in 2016 was just, I mean, absolutely incredible how much he could just make fools of the media. But that's not a good reason to choose somebody to be a president because he can make fools of the media.
I mean,
because a lot of he was making a fool of himself, and a lot of it too. Which
right, because basically what he said is he wants out, the total minutes of broadcast time to be on him, and he didn't care how he got it. But evangelicals don't really care either. We go how terrible the media is because they lie, because they distort, because they twist things, and then Donald Trump lies and distorts and twists things, so the media covers him. So everybody goes, look at how he manipulated the media, but he's just doing the same thing they do. But when Donald Trump does it, it's okay because he's kind of tweaking their nose, versus when the media does it, oh, look how terrible the media is.
Yeah, I mean, talking about manipulation, there's also a lot of people are convinced that Donald Trump is a Christian when there's just no, absolutely zero evidence for that. I mean, you have him going out there, during the Floyd riots, and he has the police clear the area, and then he has his picture with the Bible, and that's like the closest he's gotten to the Bible in quite a long time.
I think he really likes 2 Corinthians. What he said.
No, I don't have a problem with that. Some people call it 2 Corinthians.
I know they do. I know, but I'm just saying.
Actually, I do not have a problem.
I don't have
with
a problem with his saying of 2 Corinthians. All I meant is just the fact of he just came out and said he likes something, and people go, he has a favorite verse.
No, but his favorite verse was "Don't give way to envy," which is not a Bible verse.
I never heard him say that.
Yeah, he said that. They said, what's your favorite Bible verse? Don't give way to envy. Like, that's not in the Bible. You could ask a lot of really bad Christians, what's your favorite Bible verse? And they can tell you John 3:16. But he has to come up with one, and he comes up with something that's not in the Bible.
And none of the people that asked him the question recognized the fact that
a lot of people did. But,
later, but I bet the people asking the question did not.
But it's a gotcha question. And you have people ask him, have you ever, what do you ask God for forgiveness? He's like, forgiveness? Why do I need to ask God for forgiveness? I go, I eat the cracker, I drink the wine, I'm good. I mean, that's, forgiveness is such a basic thing. Even a very liberal Christian would say, yes, I do things wrong and I need to ask forgiveness. But he cannot say that he asked for forgiveness. And, the church that he goes to, Norman Vincent Peale, who liberal Christianity was not good enough for him. He had to mix it with pop psychology. It's like so far from anything that's Christian at all. And that was the church that he was a part of. That was his biggest religious influence. And it's just, and then
it was Archie Bunker.
And so, and then then everyone's wanting to say he's become Christian since that, but there's just no evidence for that. I mean, it's just a lie, and he's he has to put in so little effort to manipulate evangelicals on that. It's not that he has these carefully crafted statements with all this biblical language. He doesn't even put in enough effort to quote a singular Bible verse, and people think he's a Christian.
A singular one, not a single one, just a singular one.
Single or singular.
And I mean, you look at like George Bush. I mean, George Bush was very crafty in how he would win the evangelicals, because he'd take lines from hymns, and in the end he'd switch him from being about God to being about man, because he was a humanist. So he constantly did this. This was, and the evangelicals go, oh, that's the beginning of a hymn, a line in a hymn. He must be a godly man, when he distorts it. But like you said, Donald Trump doesn't even bother to do that. It's amazing to me that evangelicals, anybody would be out there going, this is a Christian. He's married 3 times and he's never said he's repented. He's never said that he turned from his sin. He's committed adultery.
Anything.
Right, anything ever, including where not even forgetting, he's never admitted that he's made a mistake. I mean, he's so anti-Christian, but yet people don't look at him as being opposed to Christ when everything he's doing is opposed to Christ. It's all about him. He's willing to destroy the country if it somehow makes him get more applause. That's what it looks like. And so how people are turning around and pretending like he's a Christian, it's just that they have no idea who Christians are. We talked, and when we were starting, we're going, there's a lot of liberals that say, how could a Christian vote for Donald Trump? And one of the questions is, how many of these people, if you can't recognize Donald Trump's not a Christian, don't think you're a Christian. You should just punt. You do not know who Christ is. Try reading the Bible for once.
I mean, one of the things I've kind of been trying to bring out through here is it's so easy to get sucked up in following after someone, and it's worth asking questions. We did an episode on wolves, and we talked about how wolves are really good. Wolves in the church, false teachers, they're really good at figuring out how to get you to follow after them by luring you with good things. And people talk about how we're not trying to elect, a pastor in chief. But there's this part of it where, in the end, we're also not trying to elect someone who's totally against God.
But shouldn't they at least say we are trying to elect someone who is a deacon of God, which is what the Bible says. That's what they're called. They're a minister of God. And so the people who say we're not trying to elect a pastor, fine. You're trying to elect a deacon. That's biblical language.
And I think there's this part of it where we forget that part of the nature of the presidency it's really become for a while, we've been electing wolves. We've been electing ravenous wolves because the thing about a wolf is he wants a following. He wants people just to follow after him. He doesn't have real principles. He may say good things along the way. He may be interested in your well-being in some sense, but it's for himself ultimately. Ultimately, it is for him. And there's just a real problem with Donald Trump because in the end, the reason why Donald Trump would want America to be successful is because he'd want to be able to say, I made it great again. I did this. I elevated America. I pushed it in this direction. I caused these things. And everything he's done has been from that direction. Everything he's done, he wants the glory for these things. And there's just we've reconciled ourselves to picking wolves. And I don't think we don't see any problem with that. We don't have any way back. We don't have a path away from it. And the answer is really clear. Trust God.
And we went from picking wolves in sheep's clothing to picking wolves without sheep's clothing.
Right.
There's a lot of it. Because before we expected a certain veneer and that you have to pay lip service to certain things. But now we realize that it was a veneer. But instead of going to the truth, we're just going to say, actually, we don't even care. You don't even need to do that.
We're providing the veneer. We are coming up with the justifications for why he is moral or Christian or family values.
We're the sheep's clothing.
We are the ones who are holding up the sheep's clothing and looking through it and saying,
he's wearing us. That's a real. The church has wrapped itself around them to give them respectability. And what happens is the church the salt loses its savor, and God says you're worth nothing. You have no holiness. You don't know what holiness is. You're going to be trodden underfoot of men.
So let me ask a question. Let's say that Trump wins the Republican primary, and let's say you followed along with us and you are not complicit in that. You didn't vote for him. You don't think it's a good thing. You think it's a bad thing. What's a Christian supposed to do at that point? How are they supposed to think? How are they supposed to talk to friends and family? What's a Christian supposed to do if Trump is back in play?
Proverbs 29:2. When the wicked rule, the people groan. When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. Don't vote for a wicked man like Donald Trump because he will produce groaning. We're looking at what's happening in our country right now, and we're saying, President Biden did this, President Biden did that. Donald Trump set it all up. When the wicked rule, the people groan. If you want to stop having our nation groan, start picking some righteous people.
And if, and the lesser of two evils, is an important conversation. But don't forget.
You were just trying to get a podcast reference out. We did one on the lesser of two evils.
But an important, even if you say there's two options, I'm going to vote for one of the two options. Don't forget that it's evil, and I think that's an even bigger. I think voting for the lesser of two evils is a big problem. But the problem is we as the evangelical church are not only picking the lesser of two evils, we are saying because we picked it, now it is good. And so, I can, if someone says I'm going to vote for Trump because, he's a bad guy, but, I think Biden's a little worse. Okay, I can respect that. I disagree, but there's, I can understand the reasoning there. But if then a year later you got your MAGA hat on and this, that, and the other, and you're all in on Trump, you've lost the plot completely.
And hey, I think the evangelical church has lost the plot completely anyway. The purpose of God, of the church, the purpose of all of creation is to glorify God. And when we go, well, we have to vote for Donald Trump because otherwise, Joe Biden's going to cause our economy to collapse. Well, you don't care about the glory of God. And whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, do all things to the glory of God. And we intentionally then go, but when we vote, we're voting for the glory of our pocketbook. We're voting for the glory of the economy. And we explicitly reject God. And that should frighten us because God will continue to judge us because we explicitly reject him. And what's really sad is you go to other countries, and other countries look and go, that's what a Christian country looks like. And they point to the United States. And they're still pointing to the United States, even though we've embraced sodomy, even though we have all this transgender garbage, even though we murder baby after baby after baby. These other nations still look to us and say, that's what a Christian nation looks like. That's how the evangelical church is glorifying God. We deserve the wrath of God to be poured out on us as a nation because we love our pocketbook a lot more than we love God. The church in America hates God, and we should recognize that, and you can see it in the polling places. The church needs to repent and turn back and stop loving the world and the things of the world and start loving God. One of the reasons that evangelicals like Donald Trump is because he's doing things that have this appearance of doing what they should do. We should go back and remember what we're supposed to do. Ezekiel 22, 29 through 31. The people of the land have used oppressions, committed robbery, and mistreated the poor and needy, and they wrongfully oppressed the stranger. So I sought for a man among them who will make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found no one. Therefore I have poured out my indignation on them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath, and have recompensed their deeds on their own head, says the Lord God. Instead of looking towards Donald Trump, if you want to solve the problems in this country, stop oppression, deal with the poor, care for the stranger. These are do justly. These are the things that we need to go back to. We think Donald Trump will solve the problems in this country. He never will, because the problems in this country are spiritual. And they're spiritual because the church is not standing in the gap like it's supposed to. We're the body of Christ. We have the responsibility to stand in the gap and not look towards Donald Trump to do it. He doesn't know God. Thanks for joining us.
This has been The Conquering Truth, a project of Reformation Baptist Church. If you found this helpful, you can visit us online at theconqueringtruth.com and subscribe here or in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching.